you ever want to join us, please hit me up. And today we're going to talk about another amazing topic, the stage of early stage investments. And this is going to be with Beril Kocadereli. Yeah, and I practiced a lot saying that, but fingers crossed this time it's correct. So Beril is an amazing early stage VC from Antler. And Beril, could you please give us a bit of a background, tell about yourself?
Of course. Happy to. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's very It's very nice to be here. A little bit about me. Where to start? Well, I studied engineering and combined it with studies in psychology because I was always a little bit curious about how we thought, but wanted to get the analytical perspective from engineering as well. So I grew up originally in Turkey, where I'm from, Istanbul, and stayed there until I moved to Stockholm. So my studies and all that were in Turkey. I had a VR startup somewhere in between in Turkey to increase presentation skills. We were a team of 6 with a lot of passion to actually solve our own problem because we were a little bit like freezing on stage and all that, and we observed others had the same problem. So we wanted to tackle that. So I did that for 1 year and then gave a gap year afterwards because the government funding and all that didn't really take off. The ecosystem was not as developed. Then I traveled around 15 countries where I worked a few hours a day and volunteered, and they covered the food and accommodation. So it was a scalable solution to travel and learn and meet people. I got to do very different things around then, like work in a vineyard or a diving center or a surf camp. It was great memories. And then I moved to Stockholm to do my master's in innovation management at KTH. And besides that, I worked at Nordic Impact Accelerator. And then I joined Antler's portfolio team. It was a lot about like planned ways to get more into the startup ecosystem. I got into various organizations like Startup Grind, or met so many people from the ecosystem as well. So currently, yes, I'm in the investments and portfolio team here at Antler.
Awesome. All right. That's quite a story. And, you moved from being a founder to, to the other side, to being a VC. How did that happen? And, what is how do you use your experience as a founder? Like, could you give us a bit more of a background story into your founding days?
Of course.
Yeah.
So it all started out as a university project, my startup. To finish school, we had to deliver this course where we either got to work with our peers who were industrial engineers to solve a problem of Unilever, for instance, optimization of some things and making it slightly better, versus there was a choice to form a team within different classes like electrical engineering and computer science as well, where you could have basically a problem that you solve and a solution, basically an MVP. So it sounded like this is something super interesting. So I pursued that and really worked on who should be the teammates, what do they bring on the table. So it was a lot of planning involved. Like I worked with, or maybe worked in classes, or maybe student organizations with some of the members. So I got to like really know them before inviting them to the team. And then the problem itself, we really tackled like a lot of different options, did a lot of research. But then in the end, we realized that when we were pitching the idea itself, we couldn't do it properly. And then we realized others had the same problem. So there, the idea of improving presentation skills came to being. And then we, of course, fulfilled the criteria for the course without hassle.
Right.
But then when it came to the point, do we want to pursue this or not? Then we were like quite excited. We were like, let's see all the options there is. Let's get some funding. Let's do this 24/7 in a way, because it was so exciting and it's your thing. So it gives you a lot of ownership. Whatever you see that's missing, you bring that to the table. And then we got some initial funding as well, and started pursuing this. But we saw a lot of problems within VR. For instance, the headset being heavy. So I'm talking about 3-4 years earlier.
Yeah.
Still, it's heavy and all that, but now they talk about metaverse as the next thing. But at the time, there wasn't also that much awareness, but more like a hype. VR is a new technology. Let's make the most of it. But for us, it was a lot about showing you the immersive side of VR. Like you would see the audience in front of you when you would present to get some feedback. And you would be like hearing either if you're making too many noises or you're not looking at everyone, then you would hear that from us, or time management. But we had issues with capturing, for instance, hand gestures and your body posture that were quite tricky. And as I mentioned, the weight of VR and the dizziness that it could potentially give you were quite big limitations that we realized afterwards. So in the end, we didn't pursue this fully, but I think I've learned so much when doing this that perhaps I could be bringing to the table as an investor on this other side. But I could also say that, let's say, if you are a founder who have pursued it all along the way and exited your company, then the potential that you could be bringing to the table is huge. So this is maybe nothing compared to that, but still all the empathy that you can do with the founder, the founding team, some hassles that you could foresee, because most startups go through some momentous, let's say, points where it could be quite problematic, like fundraising, for instance. Yeah, so I think it was a very valuable experience. And someday it's also nice to go back to that founding seat, learn more, and come back to this seat perhaps.
Right. No, I mean, I think I agree with you. Well, you're bringing a lot of, the feeling, like how a founder would, would feel presenting, and especially since your startup was also about that. But it's been some time since you were a founder, like now you're on the other side. Do you still get the thrill? Do you still get the same feeling, or like try to emphasize with the founders, or it's more of a now more skeptical, more realistic?
Good question. I think I still like to empathize with the founders and try to get their point of view. But at the same time, when you do that, like sometimes hear a lot of pitches in a very short time, then you try to narrow it down a bit and then look for key areas. For instance, how is their business model like? What is their go-to-market strategy? And then you're like, this is missing. And what about that? Have you thought about this? So in those moments, you could perhaps be more analytical and focus on what is there rather than the maybe person behind. But especially in pre-seed stage funding, it's all about the people and the team still. So those components are highly important because we can't do a lot of financial modeling at this stage because there isn't data. So what we look at in the end is like, who are the people behind this idea and solution and problem, and why is it them instead of someone else who is developing the solution? So the why is very important for us. And if they fulfill that quite well, then we are quite interested in the team and the people.
Right. Oh, that's thank you. I think that's quite insightful because I also the other time we had a talk with the founder, and she was absolutely amazing, and she was also raising when they didn't have anything, didn't have a product, and she said, the investors were investing not in what they see, but they were invested in me basically. And I completely understood her, because you could see she lived the idea, and she was the visionary behind it. So I had no doubts that she raised whatever she needed. So amazing. But how did you get into it? Why VC? Because you were in innovation management, and why did you end up going to VC and not, I don't know, working for corporates, or maybe with your experience founding another startup?
Good question. I think when the startup didn't continue in the long term, then I did a lot of reflections and then was thinking what to do next. That was partly how I decided to do gap year, because I didn't know what my immediate next steps were. But then when I thought quite like long and hard on this, I was like, okay, I need to learn more before coming back to startups potentially. So where can you learn more? Being a VC, you learn everything there is to know about how to assess a startup, how to the nitty-gritty details, what works well versus what fails, and learning from all of that is like a crash course in a way. So that was the initial idea. But also when I got into it, I got quite fascinated by how it feels to help passionate entrepreneurs who wants to make a change in the world, who wants to make an impact in a way. And to be able to support them gives you a lot of also great feelings that you're making a meaningful contribution. So that's what I like about being the VC in this case. So potentially I could also stay in VC rather than finding a startup. So both seats, I think, play a crucial role in how we shape the world and how to develop things further.
Awesome. Okay. And, obviously, when we talk to VCs, everyone wants to know, like, what a startup should do, like, to attract the attention, to get funding. But at first, I'd like to, to ask about you, like, and about your work. So what does it, what makes a great, successful investor? What should you be aware of? Like, what trends should you be following? Because this is another good, I think, very good trend nowadays, to bring more, especially women, into VC. So what does it mean to be a VC?
Good question. I think, what does it mean to be a VC? I guess it's more like choosing the founders to back and support fully. What it means to be a successful VC is like one step further, is more like you should not only back the right ones, the ones that solve real problems, and then when they become successful, also you become successful as the fund, but also there is some meaningful change in a way. And coming back to your question earlier, I could say that to be a successful investor yourself, you should follow all the trends there is, like all the technological developments, where the market is going, where the potentials are, so that you can keep that into consideration when you make an analysis or when you hear a pitch or all of those. That's why in the process there is a thorough due diligence after you hear the pitch, and then we look at the markets, we look at the team, but other KPIs as well, to really sit down and think hard on how should we proceed, what do we value in this case. So you should always keep yourself up to date on what's happening, meet other VCs, but meet also founders, talk to people, and then be quite open-minded about what you don't know, because of course you can't know everything, and there are so many industries, especially for the investors that don't have a sector focus. It gets quite tricky because you know a lot about different things, but nothing really deep. So that makes it quite tricky to assess those pitches.
Okay, so what about you? Are you focused on some industry, or since it's early stage, you're trying to just assess pretty much anything that comes your way?
I don't have a sector focus, and Antler doesn't have a sector focus either. But as a personal note, I would like to know more about the climate tech and impact focused landscape, because I feel like they're quite important, and that is where the world is going. So to learn more about it also, I think, brings a lot on the table. Like, for instance, hydrogen startups are growing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. So yeah, let's circle back to startups actually, and yeah, what do you think? What makes a successful pitch? What draws attention, your attention personally, maybe, or like what is Antler's preferences? What would they like to, see in a pitch or maybe in a pitch deck?
Mm-hmm. What makes a successful pitch? I think it has a lot of components. First of all, let's start with the founders themselves. Why are they doing what they're doing? Are they solving a big pain point, a problem, perhaps? So before even coming to the solution, there are so many like key considerations, I guess, starting with the team and how they tell the story. So we could consider the pitch as a story where it has a lot of components and how it comes to being, like what is the path you're following. So if you could pinpoint, we saw this and that's why we talked to X many customers, and then we decided to maybe pivot to that, and then this is where the traction is going. So I think all of that plays a key role, but of course touching the key points, let's say business model, how will you make money, what is the solution like. Sometimes it's quite complicated what founders are building, so it's a bit hard to convey that message. So how to simplify it and tell it in the most basic way, I think, is quite a skill, so that everyone understands, especially if it's a deep tech solution. We might not be the experts in your field. So how do you explain what you're building in the simplest of form, I think, is important. Of course, you can always get questions if you didn't address anything, like what about this, what about that. So how do you handle those questions? If you don't know something, you can also say, I don't know, but I will get back to you on this, which is highly appreciated, rather than, like, of course, if you don't know and try to explain, that works. But if you have no idea, then you should just say that. That's better, to be transparent and quite honest, I think, in communication. So I would say a lot of components. Oops, you're
right.
frozen.
No, sorry. Yeah. Am I back? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Everything's back. So yeah, again, agree with you completely. But I think a lot of founders are a bit afraid to say, I don't know something. Because when you're coming like and essentially asking for money to kind of buy your idea, you want to come up as an expert, right? And I mean, you wouldn't go to, I don't know, to a teacher that doesn't really know what they're talking about, right? So yeah, I kind of understand their fears, but I think the most important thing that at least nowadays that I hear from the founders, investors are asking for traction, and not a lot of startups have it. So is it possible to get funding without any traction?
To be honest, I don't think so, because traction shows that you validated that there is a demand for your solution, and that also the problem you're solving is something quite worthwhile to solve. When talking about traction, it doesn't have to be that I have X many customers, but it can also be I've talked to that many people through a survey even, and then they indicated that they would do this, they would do that. But of course, surveys have their limitations. Maybe you don't ask questions in the right way, and of course, customers, like potential customers, would say that they're willing to buy something, whereas they don't, because if it's so to speak, like vitamin versus painkiller. So if the solution is nice to have rather than a real need, then it's a different story, right? So it's important to talk to people and see where the demand is, especially your target group. The better you define your target group, the better. So like it could be where they live, what they use, gender, occupation, could be very specific as well. So important that you speak to the right stakeholders So it doesn't have to be like letter of intent, for instance, is another way. So the customers haven't yet purchased your solution, but they have the intent to do so, for instance, in this case.
Okay. So how to say I'm a startup and I want to get your attention. I want you to take a look at my pitch or just, connect with you. So what do I do? Pitch deck or no pitch deck, email, or it's better to, I don't know, just hit you up on LinkedIn. What do you do?
I think hitting someone up through LinkedIn, let's start with that, is not the best way if you have no connection to that person, because then we get those requests a lot. And then, of course, there could be like so many people who are building startups. So I think it's important to get a warm introduction or any kind of introduction, like the first step into building a relationship. It could be about, if you don't know the person, you could attend to something they're attending, perhaps meet them in person if you can. And otherwise, if you're going to send something on LinkedIn, you can at least say, hey, I have listened to this and would like to connect with you. I am building this solution. I think it's important to do the homework there a little bit rather than just sending a deck. I'm contacting you because of X, Y, Z, and I think you can add value here. So the more specific you can be, the better, I think, so that the person spends time and effort into looking at the pitch and perhaps sending it to the right person if they aren't the right person. So I think doing a little bit of homework there adds a lot of value, including who you're reaching out to.
Right. No, definitely. Absolutely agree with you. So, okay. So no LinkedIn, preferably. What about email? And in the email, say, I don't know, we had the first touch. Should I send you my pitch deck or just introduce myself and like briefly introduce the idea? Maybe, you will be able to say it's a, hard no from the beginning.
I think it's good to be specific in that case and send either the deck and explain the idea, including where you're at. Because if it doesn't fit, let's say, our investment thesis, then we wouldn't be interested. But as I mentioned, it's worthwhile to do the homework there and then reach out to someone, maybe even pinpoint that, hey, in your portfolio, I know that you've invested in company X, and that's why I think you are the right investor for me. Would you like to take an introduction call? So that's like explaining the solution, sending material, of course, but also the why there is important.
Right. Okay. And if it's a pitch deck, how long should it be, and what should absolutely be there? Because every investor kind of sends a bit of a different message here. Someone says there shouldn't be any pictures, or someone says there should be a personal story. Like say in my case, when I pitched, that was just a couple of times, but still, I kind of tend to lean on with the personal story, and then the investor would go like, you know what? Unless you're solving like a global problem or I don't know, curing cancer, you don't really need that. It's not relevant. So what do you think?
I would say it depends on a lot of things. First of all, how long do you have the time? Like, is this a 5-minute pitch versus 10-minute? Who you're pitching to? Is this let's say, early stage or a seed stage, maybe later stage? Then maybe you would include more financials. But I could maybe talk a little bit about pre-seed stage. I think it's important for the founders to talk about themselves, why they're building the solution, include things like business model, revenue stream, in this case, a little bit of financial like planning, but some milestones for them. What do they plan to achieve by which time? I think that milestone side is quite important because it shows that even though you're just beginning, you have a plan going forward. So when you're convincing someone, it's important to show that you have thought things through, and who do you plan to talk to by which time, maybe sign customers when is the MVP going to be developed, product launch and all that. Of course, you don't need to stick to anything that you show here, but it's important to plan it going
Right.
forward. There are many other like things that we can include, but I think if you search what to include in a pitch, it's quite straightforward what to include. But you can always put things in the appendix if you don't have the time and you think it's worthwhile to perhaps show it if you get that question. For instance, if you're building a solution that requires some legal thinking, then you probably will get that question if you won't address it during your pitch, because we would be concerned, let's say, if you haven't explained what's your reasoning or how you will handle it. Then you can say, hey, let's skip to the appendix and then let me walk you through. Yeah, that could be a nice tip.
Oh, right. So, and what about you? Like, with your personal preference, should I be able to explain basically any idea in 1 minute, or you would prefer longer, like, I don't know, 3, 5, 15 minutes, where we go into details and everything?
I think it's very important to be able to simplify it and say the idea very briefly, like what problem are you solving, what solution you're building, and how, perhaps. And when you talk to a founder and if they haven't narrowed it down after 10 minutes, like if you still wonder what they're building, then I don't think that's a great way to pitch. Perhaps you should hone your pitch a little bit more, especially if it's a deep tech case, like let's say very tech heavy. Perhaps you want to simplify it, but also explain some of the basics. But I think it's up to the approach is more appropriate there. Like first start with, let's say, one sentence, and then let me walk you through how it works. And then you go on the backend side and tell more details as it's needed. So depending on who your audience is, you could think about what parts to include versus perhaps skip because you assume they already are familiar. Yeah.
Okay, I see. We have a question here. What about skipping investors and going straight to marketing? Yeah, what do you think of that?
So I think if your solution does not require investors, then you shouldn't pursue investors. If you think that there is a very big tech component that will help you scale in a very short period, I think then you should go to investors. Otherwise, if you can do perhaps crowdfunding or maybe skipping investors overall, but then launching directly and then getting some revenue and then turning things around, then please do that, because it wouldn't be a good value add for investors if that is an option also. And they would probably pass on your solution or what you're building. So it would save you time and save them time. So yes, I think if they can market and all that, that is worthwhile.
No, that's it. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think there are tons of solutions that are way better if you just put them in front of the audience. I could definitely think of a couple, but do you maybe have an example, maybe even in your career, have that happened?
I don't think I have seen such an example, but thinking of, for an example, like if you'd like to build a restaurant business, for instance, you don't probably need VC money because it's a little bit like real estate and all that, like slower scaling compared to, let's say, a SaaS solution where you can launch in different countries very easily and try to penetrate the market that way. Like, for instance, 2 examples.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's just when I get a question like that, or I instantly go back to one of the pitch competitions I went to, and the solution was, so the problem was that older people usually feel isolated. They're not very tech savvy. If they get sick, then they are not able to maybe communicate. And that was a very simple solution. It was hardware, so it looked like a phone, but it was basically like just like an audio-based solution where you could say, hey, I need a company today. And, another maybe senior would say the same at the same very time, and you could connect. Right. It was AI, and it could connect you instantly. And I thought, oh my God, just put it in front of people, because if I would have it, for my granny, I would be just thrilled. I would buy it instantly because she was so like socially active, but wasn't really able to go out in her later days. So yeah, I think some solutions definitely go better without the investor. But yeah, could you tell us maybe more about the processes and like how things are done in Antler? Like what is the journey of a startup there if they want to get funded?
Of course. So Antler has this 12-week program where entrepreneurs can join, and with or without ideas, and Antler supports them very hands-on. So it's sometimes the case that teams join or solo individuals. They form teams and then they pitch their idea. We help them with sessions, workshops, but a lot of one-on-ones with the portfolio team, the founders, the program team, and then really try to connect them. When they form a team, of course, and then before they form a team, we try to facilitate that part. And there are these investment committees from time to time that they get to pitch and show us what they're building. And if we find it interesting, we invest in the company at that moment. Or we could say, hey, I think you should develop this a little bit further, reach more milestones and more traction, and then perhaps let's talk again. And then we can also invest a little bit later on. And some of our deal flow comes from this program that we have. And of course, we invest in external startups, pre-seed and seed stage. Yeah, and it's quite nice because whenever they need to fundraise, we support them a lot with our investor network, but Antler is also in 25 different locations. So when they need to scale, that is a very big value add, so that we can connect them to the right people and facilitate that process.
Right. Oh, and I think I've heard about you expanding, like adding more locations in Africa, for example, which is, I think, very, very has very good potential. But yeah, what about you? I think there is also potential for the VCs and everyone involved in funding to maybe explore other locations. Does that work?
For sure. For instance, someone in my team is now in South Korea for 2 months. She's going to help that team and the entrepreneurs there and come back to the Nordics, to Stockholm, and share learnings. And she's also bringing a lot of learnings with her from the Nordics to South Korea. So those things add quite a lot of value to everyone involved and help us really get better at how we're doing what we're doing.
All right. What about you? Do you plan on maybe going to faraway country, or maybe come back, to your homeland?
Yeah, could be.
All right.
It would be an exciting opportunity for sure.
That's great. Okay, and yeah, you mentioned that your personal preference in the industry is circular economy and impact businesses. So why so? Because your startup experience was a little bit different. How did you come to that, and why this industries?
So I guess when it was my startup, there was a big pain point in front of us, which was presenting, that we really wanted to solve. So that happened quite naturally without us thinking too much about perhaps another sector that we have no connection to, but is quite much growing. So I think leveraging your background and the problems you observe is a good way to find a solution. And at that moment, that was the problem we observed. But I think on a global scale, there is a much bigger need to change things quite faster and quite scalable so that you can affect more people and make their lives better in a way. And I think climate tech and impact tech really achieve that. And the why there is quite strong. For instance, there are a lot of government regulations that drive those markets as well. For instance, we have a big energy need now that we need to develop internally. The renewable energy sector is growing quite high paced. And I think that is why partially I'm also interested in that. It's not the case that I have a very strong, let's say, energy background that I bring to the table. Or for instance, social impact as well. It doesn't have to be climate tech. There are a lot of burnouts happening, or mental health is quite important more than ever with the technology developing at such a rapid pace. So I think addressing those big pains is the way to get users that also really want this product or whatever you're building. So I think it's a win-win situation.
Okay, and yeah, it's great that you mentioned, the experience that that a VC brings to the table. So a lot of times VCs also join the board or mentor the startups. So what about you? As an early stage VC, do you tend to somehow mentor the startups, or you just basically try to find their potential and like show them where else they could go?
Mm-hmm. So I think mentoring in that case happens within every VC because we give a lot of advice and a lot of check-ins happen depending on where the startup is at, especially at the more early stages when things aren't yet developed as much. Then we do more frequent check-ins and perhaps guidance and all that. But as the startup grows more and more, then it's more like they report quarterly or let us know where they're at, except when they need to fundraise. Then we really talk strategies and how to change things for the better. But I think mentoring happens all the time, but we don't actively take board seats frequently at this stage.
Okay, I see. And you're also a mentor for Founder Institute. So do you also mentor as an investor, or you also have a different approach there?
I guess it was more like whatever I can do to help, I try to do that. It doesn't have to be always like representing Antler either, but as an individual, I'd like to contribute to startup ecosystem and to founders and all that. So I think when they invited me a few times, I was happy to join and share learnings and support the founders.
Perfect. And actually, yeah, I have to say this is how we first met. We haven't even met actually. I just went to Founder Institute event and saw Beril, and I was really impressed by the way she was so insightful towards the pitches that were going on there. But yeah, and I kind of want to just go through this angle just a little bit maybe, and tell me if that's okay. But yeah, as I mentioned before, you were the only woman there, and kind of like through the course of this podcast, it's been brought up a few times that there are very few women VCs, and there are a lot of organizations now, a lot of movement, of bringing more women because they would love to reduce bias, they would love to maybe bring more empathy to the table as well. So what is your feeling about it? Do you see a lot of women VCs, or do you see maybe a different approach in what women tend to invest in, or like how they do things?
I think there's definitely a huge gap in the industry when it comes to men and women investors that really needs to be addressed. It's also not even gender, but other types of like diversity, because the more diverse the teams are or people are, the better the business outcomes. So it's also rational to make it happen, and basically having representation is important in all levels. For what we can do is having more women investors, but also more diverse investors at the higher stages, so that we can take all perspectives into account when we make an investment, rather than one single perspective each and every time. I think State of European Tech report was even highlighting that even in Nordics, it is not really as developed either. We have a long way to go when it comes to closing this gap, and definitely more awareness in the area for sure.
Okay, thank you. That was very honest. So yeah, let's get back to your experience. Do you remember maybe the first startup that you thought you really want to invest in, and this is something that you've never seen before, or like this is very inspiring?
I can't think of something currently, but because it also requires going back in time and then thinking about the first pitch. So I unfortunately don't remember that. But I think there are so many great teams and great solutions out there that, it's definitely exciting to see how how things develop.
Right. Okay. So maybe you could recommend, if someone who's listening to us could, go and become a VC, what do they do? Like basically, how do they get to this job, and like what is the learning curve, and like what are the entry requirements?
I could say that having a background that you can leverage in this industry is important. Perhaps you have had a startup before, that you know the dynamics a bit, or you come from some part of the ecosystem. Perhaps you worked at a startup, didn't found one yourself, or a scale up, but having experience of what it means to work also in a fast-paced environment is, I think, important. I think also if you are very good with numbers, that's a huge value add. Let it be cap tables or financial data that you could analyze. And the starting point, I don't think there is one very clearly defined way. It could be so many different ways. Like a founder sometimes exits their startup and then becomes an investor, where they can add a lot of value since they've gone through the journey. They know the ups and downs and all the learnings. So their advice is even more valuable than the investors, let's say, who learned through internet or experience over time.
Okay. All right. And could you give maybe like the 3 personal tips for successful fundraising? What are the 3 things that you absolutely notice when you get to the pitch?
Let me think. I think one thing could be building something that people want, so that of course you will have customers and people really wanting your product, because you are building something that you've validated. So doing the homework there, getting traction and testing your solution, I think is quite important. Another one could be telling a good story around why you're doing what you're doing, including your maybe personal background, the experience you're bringing to the table, and that being in a coherent way. And then maybe the third one is getting traction. So once you talk to all these people, you see interest, do they jump on this, or are they like, yes, we would be willing to buy it, but the numbers don't support you maybe? So the numbers also should support this argument.
Right. Oh, that's amazing. I think those are very relevant and yeah, very kind of logical. And but unfortunately, not a lot of people, not a lot of founders kind of come prepared, or I think there is so much information, and it's really diverse. Like even in my very little experience, I would go with the same pitch to different investors, and someone would say, you don't have any traction, like the pitch deck doesn't really matter, but you don't have any traction, so it's not really interesting. Or someone would say, you just have like 8 slides and we need about 30. And so it was very different. But yeah, I think what you're saying is absolutely great. But yeah, if you could maybe give us a bit of an advice, who else you think we should bring to this podcast, and who else would benefit, the founders, because you were sharing amazing experience and information. Who's in your network we should definitely approach?
I think bringing different stakeholders is a good idea. So it doesn't always have to be the founder versus the investor, but for instance, someone from the government side, someone from the policy making side, so that we can get to see everyone's perspective on the matter. But perhaps someone from the university research
Yeah.
who's slightly into this domain, like KTH Innovation could be an
Right.
example. That's so that we can understand how everyone else thinks about the ecosystem and the challenges and what the potentials as well. Yeah, I think it could add a lot of value.
Oh, great. Okay. And please share your inspiration, for your work, for, going further, for learning, because there is a lot of learning involved in your job. So what inspires you?
Very good question. I think many things inspire me. One of them being I have a huge motivation and interest to make things better and make a huge impact in people's lives. That doesn't have to be one way or the other, like a very clearly defined goal, but
Yeah.
touching a lot of people's lives in a way and making it better. So it could also be my surroundings, my friends, and the people I interact with on a day-to-day basis. But I would like to scale it a little bit more, which could now expand to founders and what they're building and helping them to do what they're doing, so that yeah, at least we have something permanent or tangible that changes things for the better.
Okay, all right. And I think the last question will be about the network, the community, because again, this has been um, coming up a lot of times during the podcast. What about the community? Like, is it important for a founder, and of course for investor as well, to build the community and to try and get as many people into your network, because like you never know where a successful business could have come from or who could refer you. Do you agree with that, or then again, you're kind of oversubscribed and, your LinkedIn is full and you wouldn't do that?
I think it's definitely super important. As you said, you never know, right?
Yeah.
So also the good reputation really gets out. Same with the bad reputation. So like it's just important to be in a strong community and ecosystem, so that you can help someone else out, and then maybe if you need something one day, you get helped from the ecosystem without that much of a hassle. So I believe in the power of community and being together in a way. So that's partially also why I changed the Turkish ecosystem at the time, because it wasn't as developed at the time. With funding, with where it was, with the startup, like pre-seed funding especially. But in Stockholm, what we see is not only a lot of funding in the area, but very strong support between founders and the network. So I think whatever helps facilitate that, we should be participating in it willingly,
Yeah.
because it's going to benefit everyone.
Absolutely. Oh, and being in Istanbul right now, I kind of get what you're saying. And hopefully we will be able to overcome that because, again, this is a new place for us too. It would be great, to be welcomed into some kind of a community or maybe even like build something ourselves. But I'll definitely keep that in mind, what you just said.
Yeah. And on that note, I think the ecosystem now in Istanbul is developing at a very high pace. At the time, I think it wasn't as developed, but now there are all these co-working spaces, all these other like networking events to help people meet and support each other. So it's going in the right direction for sure.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm definitely really, really glad to hear that. Okay, then, I unfortunately don't have any more questions, and I think we had a bit of a technical issue and we weren't live on LinkedIn, but only on every other platform. But we will definitely share this with the LinkedIn and I'll hit you up, do a follow-up. But thank you, Beril, so much. I think everything you said was really, really good and, very insightful, very useful for all the founders out there. And I'll definitely keep in touch with you for more.
Please do. Thank you so much for inviting me. And it was great to be here.
Sure, thank you. And yes, next week, as always, on Tuesday, we're going to be joined by Mariah Barber from Start Out and Visible Strength. We're going to talk about accessible tech. So again, thank you, and thanks everyone for listening, and see you next week.